All right. What is burnout? What causes it? And how does one effectively take the mind along in order not to burn out? All right. So let's start with a broad definition. Intellectual, emotional, and physical exhaustion brought on by prolonged or repeated stress. So this is sort of a modification of a definition that came out of the Psychology Today website. So yeah, we can think of burnout as being a sense of exhaustion at the different levels of the personality. So intellectually, we sort of lose our ability to focus or to think clearly. Physically, there's that just straight fatigue. The emotional side of things, emotional burnout or emotional exhaustion can be thought of in different ways. One is just the inability to connect with your emotions. You sort of feel like your emotions are empty. Another is the inability to be emotionally resilient. So where challenges that you experience might be easily accommodated, when we get burnt out, they feel like much more of a psychological load. So it's more difficult to manage things. So the emotional side of things can sort of have different ways of looking at it. So it's been brought on by repeated stress. So we want to look at stress and very quickly in terms of its causes. So generally speaking, we've covered 4 types of causes of stress. So I'm not going to go into them too deeply here because we've gone across them before, but likes and dislikes, distraction, desire and expectation, and attachment. So likes and dislikes is when we are viewing the world through what we like and what we don't like. It's the lens through which we are judging the stimuli coming in. Distractibility is just that inability for us to focus. Desire and expectation, that sense of I want from the world and I expect the world to deliver something to me. And attachment is that sense of emotional dependency on objects or beings in our environment, being a certain way, being present, functioning in a certain way, giving us certain things. So we've talked at other times of the way that these things cause stress. So any specific clarifications, by all means, bring them up with regards to these aspects, but I won't go into them unless there's any specific questions. So how do you bring the mind along? So we can look sort of quite quickly at the ways of managing each one of these. So when we look at the world through our likes and dislikes, essentially what happens is we're developing expectations. And so the way to diffuse an expectation is to manage it by looking at what is really the case. So it's making an accurate assessment of the environment and understanding that nature will be nature. When it comes to our distractions, the reason we get easily distracted is because we don't have a clear goal. We're not convinced internally with mind and intellect that this is the thing I should be doing. We're not enthusiastic towards the thing we're doing. So it's easy to get distracted off it. So having a clear goal or having good goal setting is important for generating that conviction and that enthusiasm so that your attention is channeled. Also scheduling. So simplifying your life in a way where you have a pretty clear understanding of what's coming next. Your mind is prepared for the next chunk of your day. First thing I do is my study, then I've got some exercise, then I've got food, then I get my work, then I do etc. Or you chunk your week. Mondays and Tuesdays are where I do all my admin stuff. Later on in the week is where I do all of my human interaction, person-to-person stuff. If you can broadly simplify your life through a scheduled way of functioning, the mind gets into the flow, gets into the rhythm. The same thing is true when it comes to sleep. One of the most important ways of having a good sleep across your lifetime is to have it as scheduled as practical. go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time every day of the week. The mind gets used to that and it slips into that. And distractions, self-control. Knowing what it is that distracts you, putting some reasonable limits on that thing. So if you know that you can easily spend an hour scrolling through a social media profile, how do you manage that? Put some limits on it. Okay, I'll look at my social media, that particular social media profile, only after a certain time of the day. And then I'm anytime I like, as much as I want, but after 5 p.m., whatever is reasonable for you, but putting some sort of reasonable limits on things. For desire and expectations, ideals. So this is an important one. The ideal has two components. One is that it serves others. The second is that there's a self-development aspect to it, recognizing areas where you need to grow. And for attachment, we know attachment is love plus selfishness. So turn that selfishness around and so perform acts of service. So it's an attitude. Where you have an attachment to a particular area of life or a person, if you think about what are their needs, what can I do to serve their needs? There's that attitude of service. It just takes the attention off the selfish component. So those are the four general aspects. So those are the four specific aspects. In general, managing stress is done through the self-development disciplines, which we've again covered at other times, of knowledge, service, and devotion. The other aspect, and this is sort of where I want to spend a little bit more time here, was with regards to self-assessment. The reason that we get burnt out is because we're not aware of when we should have stopped doing something. Now, that doesn't just mean the doing of the activity, but the mental part of it as well. So we each have certain capacities for intellectual, emotional, and physical work, and in different fields. If you have a really natural interest in something that you've had since you were born or since you were very young, then you'll have a greater capacity to be with that. You might know someone who can watch an entire cricket game, which is 8 hours long, or a 5-day cricket match. They can sit and watch every ball of a 5-day cricket match. You're lucky you can watch one session. They have an interest and enthusiasm for it, which means that their capacity to watch cricket is much more than somebody else's. So what's your natural capacity for a particular activity, both intellectually, emotionally, as well as physically? What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? What are you good at? And what do you have to put more time and effort and concentration into to get to the same level of proficiency? So having a self-assessment of your capacities, your strengths, and your weaknesses is important here, because if you expect yourself to have the same kind of capacity as your coworker or your brother or your sister, it's not going to work. That person's born with a different set of vasanas, a different set of natural tendencies. So they have a naturally greater capacity to do that. If you try and match them, then you're not staying true to your own nature. So you're trying to match them or match another person, you try to do what another person can do, naturally there's going to be a burnout because you're forcing yourself beyond your capacity. And understanding what your needs are. So in chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a section where he talks about this, where you generate energy when there is a regulated lifestyle. He talks about inhalation and exhalation, prana and apana. And he says those people who are balanced in both. And he uses the idea of pranayama, which is the regulated breath control in the yogic tradition. The idea is that when you practice proper pranayama, you generate energy in the body. Makes sense. But take that from a broader perspective. When you naturally balance the complementary opposites that exist in your life, you generate energy within the system of your life and across the days and months and years. So look at your needs across these complementary dimensions. You have action and rest, you have work and play, you have contact and space, etc. So that's just the first, that's just three that make sense, but it's a matter of analyzing for yourself. There are times where you need to be involved in action and times where you need to rest. And that's true for the day. You might say from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., that's when I'm active. Outside those hours, I'm in a restful state. Even if I'm exercising, I do my exercise after 6 p.m. You can still consider that a form of rest because you're not doing any intellectual work, you're not doing any emotional work, you've turned your phone off, you're not dealing with people, you're not dealing with schedules, you're just enjoying the bliss of the body. So it's restful as far as that part goes. It's true within larger time scales as well. You might recognize that it's important to take a couple of days off that activity for a while. That's work, but I need to have a break from it. Play is an important aspect. And as a kid, we know what play is. It's easy to figure out what play is. As an adult, it's much more difficult. But perhaps you can think of play as that stuff that you do just because you like it. There's no reason outside of the pure enjoyment of it. That's play for you. It doesn't require a justification outside of itself. Contact and space. Okay, so this is for people, loved ones, colleagues, co-workers, but also for various sorts of activities in general. So the problem is that we tend to privilege one of these complementary opposites over another. And for burnout, it's clear which one we are privileging. We're not privileging rest. We're not privileging play. We're not privileging space. We are putting too much emphasis on action, work, and contact. And so we need to figure out why. So managing the burnout isn't just managing those causes of stress, which we've, like I said, touched on numerous times elsewhere, but also looking at why I went beyond my capacity. So this is a sort of an introspection that you can do after the fact. So it's a matter of looking at a time or a number of times where you have been burnt out and looking back at when you went beyond your capacity. So it's like any sort of example you can use. One that's common is with regards to relationships. So you're in a relationship for 2 years, and then the next 6 months is terrible, and you look back after the breakup and you say, yeah, we should have broken up after 2 years. We stayed in it much longer than we should have. Okay, same sort of analysis you can do for a burnout type situation. I should have taken a break at that point. That would have been a natural point for me to have a pause and move away from the activity that burned me out. My capacity was such and such, but I went beyond my capacity. So trying to identify approximately, you don't have to get this exact, this is an approximation here, approximately when you ought to have broken from the activity and moved into something else. So when did I go beyond my capacity? When should I have taken a break? And of course, most importantly, why didn't I? So the reason that we continue to push beyond when we should have taken a break is either, you can think of it as inertia or desire. or some sort of mixture. But let's separate them out. Tamas or rajas. So inertia is I got into a habit, or I got into a momentum of doing and just wasn't really aware enough of my own body, mind, and intellect to know that I was wearing out the system, that I was running on empty. So it's a sort of a lack of awareness. The other reason that we don't take a break is because of rajas, or desire and expectation on ourselves. I have to get this done. I have to do more. I have to keep going. So identifying the point of burnout and identifying the underlying reason behind it. And one of the ways that we've done this a number of times is to think about it as an underlying belief, which we may or may not be aware of. Generally, we're not aware of, which leads to a sense of anxiety. And in order to manage that anxiety, we act in a certain way. Okay, so how does this work? I'll give you a random example that might work for this kind of idea. There might be this underlying belief that I'm only worthy of praise if I achieve at such and such a high level. This is a belief that I have to achieve X. Well, it's not even X. That's actually a bad example, because the way these work is that they're not generally quantifiable. Let's make it a different one. If I'm not working, I'm lazy. Okay, it's much simpler as well. If I'm not working, I'm lazy. There's a belief. So that underlying belief leads to the anxiety of, what will I look like to others if I take a break? How will my co-workers, my friends, my family, my parents, my partner, how will I look if I take a break, if I'm not working? So there's an anxiety. I don't want to appear lazy. So how do I manage that anxiety? Well, by working. And so I work to make sure I don't appear lazy. Now, that doesn't satisfy the underlying belief. That continues to function. And so it continues to drive me into activities so I don't appear lazy to myself and others, and I burn out. So understanding that this sort of mechanism is at play here. So the method to bring the mind along, let's go back to the question. How does one effectively take the mind along in order to not burn out? So what you need to do to not burn out is to take a break at the appropriate time. Okay, now that's good advice, but that doesn't work, because that advice is being addressed to what you might call the conscious mind. Yeah, I agree. I should take a break at the appropriate time. Cigarette smoker says, yes, I agree. I should stop smoking. That doesn't stop the cigarette from going in the mouth. So that recognition that I should take a break at the appropriate time is only the starting point, not the end point. Why don't I take the break at the appropriate time? So this is where the self-reflection comes in. What does it mean if I take a break? What does it say about me if I take a break? And that's where the self-reflection is so important, because the answer to that will be different for everybody. So there's two ways to approach this, what you might call analytically and intuitively. So I gave an example of an analytical one just now. If I take a break, it means I'm lazy. So I just made that up out of thin air. But there's a logical cause-effect relationship there. It makes sense that if I take a break, that might mean I'm lazy. It could mean something else. It could mean something else. It could mean something else. So you might come up analytically with 3 or 4 different reasons that make sense in answer to that question. What does it mean if I take a break? So that's the analytical side of it. The intuitive side of it is to see which ones resonate for you. Ones which make you go, ah. When you see it written down, when it's come out of your pencil, you've written it on your paper, you get a flush of emotion, or there's a somatic experience, the hairs on your arms stand up, or there's a big sigh. There's some sort of emotional or physical connection to an idea that isn't there with some of the other ones. That's the more intuitive side of it. So where there is a reaction, emotional, physical, intellectual, that's the one to follow. So what does it mean if I take a break? It means I'm lazy. That one resonates. So I follow that one. Then you start to address it with knowledge. Question it. So first of all, question its validity. Is that the case? It's easy to see for that one, it's no. Again, that may or may not help. Because again, the idea that, no, it doesn't make sense that simply by taking a break, it means that you're lazy, is addressing the rational, not the rational, I should say, the more conscious mind. One of the ways to treat it then is to, what you might call, change the script or change the narrative, and to look at it in the other direction. What does it mean if I take a break? So instead of saying it means I'm lazy, what's the positive side of taking a break? Well, we talked about it earlier up. It means I'm taking care of my needs. It means I'm being well regulated, just like it talks about in chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita. It means I'm following the message of the scriptures. It means I've made a correct assessment of my capacities. It means I'm objective to my abilities. So you can start to list out all of the positives that taking a break means. And this sort of thing is relatively easier because you're doing this from the context of burnout. Who gets burned out? The one who doesn't understand what their needs are, doesn't recognize, isn't aware of their point of burnout, is being driven by rajas. So what does it mean if I take a break? It means I'm being sattvic. It means I have self-awareness. It means I'm taking care of my needs, which means I'm objective to them. There's a story of a Swami living alone in the forest, and his family a family is walking in the forest, and they come across him. They immediately recognize the holy man and revere him and offer their respects and so forth. And the father says, "Is there anything that I can offer you before we leave?" And he says, "Yes, leave your daughter behind." Okay, horrible story. But the reason that it's told is that it indicates the complete objectivity that the Swami has towards his own needs. It's talking about that objectivity to the own body, mind, and intellect. Anytime we take more than we need, anytime we take less than we need, it's the ego functioning. Lack of objectivity. There's that quote in the Vedanta treatise by E. Carpenter. He says, you must vouchsafe the personality that much sympathy as you would to a complete stranger, no more, no less. So when you think about the way you would relate to a stranger, oh, you need something here, take this. But we don't relate like that to our own bodies, minds, and intellects. We take more than we should. So what does it mean to take from your body? It means to do more than your body's capacity, or your mind, or your intellect. You're taking from your own equipments. Can anybody else hear that noise? No? There's a sudden flash of music or something. Okay. So if we are objective, it means that we're not taking from the body, mind, and intellect. It means we're not starving it. It means we're not forcing it, giving it more than it can take. So making this self-assessment of what our capacities and our needs are is, again, it's only the first part of it, because we can understand what our needs are and still not give ourselves what we need. So it's a matter of recognizing the underlying mechanism that is functioning to stop me from giving myself what I need, in terms of that balance of action and rest, work and play, and addressing that directly. First of all, by simply seeing it for what it is, and then by providing the alternate script. Because you can think of these underlying belief patterns as scripts, algorithms that are running below the threshold of our conscious awareness. So you can't go into your vasanas and change them, but you can go to the lowest level, or the most subtle level, I should say, of your conscious awareness and speak there. And when you do that, that becomes the new layer of thought. So the important thing is not the words. The important thing is the intention. So an intention is, if you like, the subtlest level of our awareness. So when I take the break, I might have a set of words that go with it. What does it mean when I take a break? It means that I am being more sattvic because I'm giving my equipments what they need. It's showing my self-awareness, etc. We've gone through this already. You might give yourself that script. The key element is not the repeating of the words. The key element is the intention underlying it. And if you're connecting to that, those are the vasanas you're laying down in direct, if you like, contradiction or opposition to that other underlying thought pattern of, if I take a break, it means I'm lazy. If I'm not working, it means I'm lazy. Okay, any clarifications or queries to any of that?
Glenn, so does that mean like I could have different capacity for different activity types, like different like mental, emotional capacities? So
Yeah, that would mean that. When you say different types, what sort of things do you mean?
like for example, at work, one category of things is like sitting in a room by myself and coding. Another thing is like hiring. Like, is it possible that I have a different capacity for each?
Yeah, it would. Think of it as, like anything, different skill sets. The skill set required for a good coder are what? Okay, now you'll know what those are. The skill set, required for a good HR administrator are what? Okay, different set of skills. And so, yeah, you'll have different capacities. You don't need a lot of empathy to code, right? You need enough empathy for the end user so that it's actually a good, user experience. You just want to write code that is most easy for you to write. You're also thinking about the end user, but by and large, you don't need a lot of empathy to be a coder, right? But if you're an HR administrator, you need slightly more because you're dealing directly with human beings face to face on a day-to-day basis. So your capacity for HR type work will depend upon your capacity for that kind of empathic reach. So it's the same idea we talked about in the past of matching your activity with your swadharma. If someone's a great coder, they may not be the best person to do your HR work, and vice versa. Someone who's great in HR, unless they are having an exchange of emotions with people, they're just not happy. They're not satisfied in their job, and they might be able to write code, but they're not going to be very, I just need to take a break from this because I need to go and talk to someone, ask them about their day. So yeah, different skill sets where we will all have different capacities for. And again, this is part of the problem, is that we have these expectations that I should be good at everything. No, you can't. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. Right? You can be a great HR. Go ahead.
What do you mean by that?
Human beings, we can, learn and adapt and develop a skill set. You might not be very good, say, HR person, but for some reason or other, you're the only person who is there for the job, so you can develop that skill set. But you can't develop that skill set and exhibit that one, and the coding one, and the engineering one, and the organizing one, and you can't do everything because you've got a limited amount of resources available to you. But you can do anything in the sense that you can pick maybe one or two things to be good at, pick one or two things to spend your energy on. You can do anything, but not everything. And that's where, I know someone who, for example, who runs a huge business in terms of the amount of property development that they do. There's like 4 people in the team. But what the boss has done very cleverly is to find each person's unique ability, the thing that they're good at and that they love. And he says, you do that and don't do anything else. You HR person, that's all you do. You finance, that's all you do. And he's got the 4 key areas and got one person doing each of it, and you get this perfect unit. If everyone tries, or if someone tries to do everything, then there's naturally going to be areas that they're not as good. And if they try to be as good in area A as they are in B, then they're going to potentially get burnt out because they don't recognize it's a different set of capacities, different natural abilities. So I need to take more of a break here. Whereas for this, I can, I do this in my spare time. I love it.
I guess another question I have is, so like currently, let's say I've taken on this role of having to do like anything that no one else is willing to do. Not because I want that, but because I guess that's part of the obligation of being a founder. But at the same time, I can recognize like there are certain things that I can spend like hours, days doing, and certain things couple hours and I'm like, I need a break. How do I balance having to do on one hand like these obligations, like for example, if no one else is willing to do, let's say like hiring, and hiring needs to be done, but at the same time that's not highest capacity, how do I balance that?
What are you balancing it with? What are the two things that are being balanced?
I guess when I'm only doing those kind of activities which I don't like, but are needed, how do I like? Okay, maybe I'll have to think about this and rephrase the question.
Yeah. Yeah. So think about the two things that need to be balanced. What are you trying to balance out? But generally speaking, in terms of what you've said, the idea is very much the same. Okay. So first of all, if you've recognized that there really is no other option. Okay. So the hiring, it has fallen to me. So first of all, we'll presume that you've exhausted other options, which is sharing the load amongst others who could do it, and or looking to outsource it, or etc. And those other options aren't there. It has fallen to you. Then it's simply a matter of recognizing what your capacity is and knowing the amount of time that you can spend on it before it starts to become detrimental. And so it means, okay, I'm not as good at that as I am at this. That, I can do all day, 4 hours straight without a break every day. The hiring stuff and reading through CVs, going through interview questions, another Zoom interview with another person. It's terrible. So it's a matter of recognizing what that balance needs to be for that particular activity. On, off, on, off. How much time between do I need to sort of downtime from it? And how much time can I spend on it and still be effective in all of my other stuff? Because if I get burnt out during this activity, I can't do my other activities anyway. So it's a matter of, again, just going through that assessment of what my needs are. And your question from earlier on, just before, was a really good one. Does it mean that I have different capacities and different activities? Yes. So recognizing that fact exists is key. Because without recognizing that, you can easily fall into the trap of, I'm good at that, I suppose I'll be good at this. Yeah. And this is the problem with not just being good at stuff, but this is the problem with being praised for being good at stuff, is that we can develop expectations to be good at other stuff. And I want to please the people who praised me, so I'll be good at this as well. So how do I get good at that? By putting in 10 times the effort, and that burns me out. So it's trying to, again, so that speaks again to that underlying assumption. What am I looking for here? I'm looking for praise from the external environment. Why? Well, because that's how I know that I'm valuable as a human. So I have to keep doing that to keep getting it. So looking at these things and finding them, and when you see them and you get that sort of aha, that can be enough to start to dismantle them. But again, you need to continue to pour the solvent on there to dissolve it, which is that self-awareness and that the other narrative, and investigating those assertions that the mind is making. So yeah, an important aspect of this is looking at, what am I looking for from my external environment? And one of the principles that we've worked with in the past is whatever you are asking from the environment, give to yourself. It's sort of almost like a close relative of the one Whatever you want for yourself, give to others. They sort of kind of go hand in hand. What do I want for myself? I want people to speak to me respectfully. That's what I want. I give it to others, and you'll find that need is being satisfied. So also, what do I want from my environment? I want to be told I'm, worthwhile existing. Give that to yourself. Find a way to satisfy that thought, that need that doesn't require something outside of yourself. Because that's what a lot of these underlying assumptions are about, getting something from the environment. We're avoiding something from the environment, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of self-reflection involved in a lot of this. And this is really the self-development or the Vedanta aspect of it. If you Google burnout and solutions to burnout, you get a lot of horizontal information. It's all great information and probably nothing that you couldn't have come up with yourself. But all of that horizontal information doesn't stop you from burning yourself out. It's because it doesn't address the deeper assumptions and beliefs that drive the action that makes you burn out. So yeah, it's really where the Vedanta comes in, is through the practice of self-reflection.
Lots of it needed, for sure.
Yeah. You got nothing better to do. Okay, any other clarifications on this particular topic? Okay, so we had another question come through the chat box. Question 1. When you're in deep sleep, is it only vastness that are present? How do you wake up when your alarm goes off if there is no mind and intellect in deep sleep? Okay, so you can think of deep sleep as a live zero. So I tried explaining this once before and did a really bad job, so let's have another go. So there's a term in engineering, live zero. So essentially what it means is if you've got a piece of equipment and it's currently not operating, you have a sensor on there, shows you not currently operating. But what happens if the sensor is broken? Then the sensor is saying, oh, zero, not operating, but it might be operating, but the sensor is broken. And so to show you that the machine is at zero, you actually have an electrical signal saying that's actually at 4 milliamps, not the zero that you might think. So it's not a true zero, it's a live zero. Yeah, that needs work, that analogy. All right, I'll keep at it. So in any event, it's not a true zero. It's what you might call the bare minimum mind and intellect functioning. How do we know this, or what might be some evidence for this? If you've ever had a general anesthetic, right? I know someone who had this experience recently, and it exactly mirrors one that I had myself. Lying on the gurney before the operation, just musing and thinking to myself, oh, I wonder how long the operation is going to take. And I suddenly realized, hang on, that's a different ceiling. So I went from awake to awake. There was no deep sleep in anesthesia. When you're in deep sleep, when you go to bed tonight and you wake up tomorrow, you will know that you slept. There'll be a sense of a gap and a waking up. Anesthesia doesn't have this. There's no gap. It's seamless. You go from, it's like when you watch a movie and it gets split. The scene just gets split from one thing to straight to the next. Your consciousness is like that. So for anesthesia, you're awake, there's stuff happening, perceptions, emotions, and thoughts, and then just flick back to perceptions, emotions, and thoughts. Deep sleep doesn't have this. You're at a state of quiescence, of quietness, but there's still what you might call a rudimentary mind and intellect functioning. Otherwise, when you come back into the waking state, you wouldn't have that ability to recognize that you slept. So how does the alarm wake you up? It makes its way through. And you've probably had a similar experiences elsewhere where you are having a dream in which, there's a strange animal outside making a bizarre bleating noise. Some mixture between an elephant and a sheep. And then you slowly fade out of that dream and there's they're doing construction in the house across the way. So what happened? The noise from the construction across the way bled its way somehow into the mind and intellect, and there it is, it's appearing in your dream. So there is some rudimentary connection. It's the same reason you can wake a person up out of deep sleep. You touch their skin and it wakes them up. So that message must be going from the senses into the mind and intellect to rouse them out of that deep sleep state. But for practical purposes, we say that it's only vasanas that are present because there's no emotion. You're not feeling anything in deep sleep. You're not thinking anything in deep sleep. You don't go, this is a lovely deep sleep. I am sleeping deeply and it feels so nice. It doesn't happen. There's no capacity for formed thought. There's no emotional experience. So there's no mind and intellect in that sense. But there is a rudimentary connection to the body and consequently to some sort of external environment. Any clarifications there? Okay, second question. In the VT, chapter 8, the personality chart, happiness is discussed. Why do people stay in situations that are clearly unhappy, even if they logically know it is toxic for them? So I'm not entirely sure which aspect of the personality chart is being referenced there.
It's the Sukham part of the personality chart. We go actor, action.
Yep. So which aspect
happiness.
of it?
So what Swamiji says is that all action, good or bad, is ultimately conducted for our happiness. And I'm saying now, if that is the case, I'm just trying to reconcile why would somebody stay in a clearly a bad job, bad relationship, something that is negative or toxic. Why would they want to stay in there if all action, irrespective of good or bad, is done for happiness?
Because they believe that by staying there, something can be gained. Or, to put it another way, some suffering can be avoided. Okay, you take that, what you just said, right? You take the highest spiritual stance. The guru's watching all of us. Why is she getting married and having kids? If all action is done for happiness, why is she getting married and having kids? She knows it's going to lead to attachment, yet she's still doing it. There is a belief, there is a sense that if I do that, there'll be a superior sense of happiness at the end of it, or consequently, if I don't do this, I will suffer. If I don't find a partner, I'll be alone. So what? If I'm alone, I'll be unhappy. So I'm avoiding a sense of loneliness. I'm avoiding a sense of unhappiness by having a partner. Or to put it another way, once I have a partner, I'll be accepted in my community. That could be another way to think about it. So you're trying to gain something from an action, or you're trying to avoid a suffering from an action. There is an underlying belief that by choosing this, it's the best option for my satisfaction. Why does someone stay in a bad job? Well, what's the other option? Leave the job. What if I don't find another one that's as good? Staying in a bad relationship. Where will I go? How will I look after myself? Where will I stay? What will happen to me if I do leave? The fear of the unknown can be stronger than the unhappiness of the current situation. So there's an aspect of the mind that is caught up in the belief that this is the way to avoid that specific set of sufferings. So in that sense, we're all making the same choice. What varies is the degree of ignorance or the degree of accuracy. So someone said, so let's say, let's take the two examples that I gave. By staying in this abusive relationship, at least I'm staying with what I know, because the unknown and the uncertain is far more terrifying. Okay, that's not very true. You're probably far better off to get out of the relationship, but there's some sense in which that is true to that person. If I have a partner and a family, I'll be more satisfied. Also ignorance, but more true. Okay, it's not that they're both at the same level of ignorance. One is clearly more true than the other. But from the highest perspective, it's all ignorance. So why do we stay in situations that are unhappy? Because the opposite, or moving out of that situation, has something that is more fearful. And so I stay in what is unhappy for me. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that we get acclimatized to suffering. We don't realize the degree to which we're actually unhappy because it's been going on for so long. Simple example, you are, not example, simple analogy. You're at your workplace, you turn up 8 a.m. and there's a jackhammer outside, they're doing construction. It's going on all day. By 11 o'clock, it's still there, it's still annoying you, but you've got so used to it, you don't really hear it anymore. Until 12:30, when the guys finally break for lunch, what happens? In that silence, bliss. Now, you weren't actively feeling agitated at 12:29. At that point, you had become acclimatized to the noise and acclimatized to the inner agitation. It's become so present that you're not really aware of it. It's only when it suddenly gets removed that you were aware all that time, oh, no, now my shoulders relax. So there's these two aspects. We get acclimatized to a negative situation and don't see it for what it is. And we are choosing something because choosing the opposite seems to be more fearful. And the way to understand this question is to point that back at ourselves. Why is that person staying in a situation that is clearly not beneficial for their happiness? Make the presumption, just as an experiment, just as an exploration, make the presumption, I'm doing the same thing. I'm staying in a situation that is not serving my happiness. I'm continuing to make choices that don't serve my happiness. Whether it's not putting appropriate boundaries in with colleagues, families, co-workers, etc. Whether it's my diet and exercise regime, whether it's maintaining old relationships from old lower values that I no longer really identify with. Could be anything. I'm continuing to make choices that don't serve my well-being. Why am I doing that? I don't want to offend those people and tell them that, I don't want to be your friend anymore. There you go. You're making a choice. You are avoiding something. You know how much effort it is to exercise and change my diet habits, and my family will have to change their diet habits. What a hassle. Okay, you're avoiding something. You're making what you think is a better choice. You have to find a new set of friends or meeting new people. What if they don't like me? There's a whole range of choices that we need to make to get out of one situation. So there's an inertia, there's a fear, likes and dislikes are all getting in the way of that. And as I say, we may not even be aware that the situation is causing us that degree of agitation.
Thank you, Glenn. That really, really makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, the clarifications or comments.
Your answer to the burnout question is very helpful. Lots of now I can see how like Rogers plays a role in keeping certain like making you function beyond capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the way to think of Rajas is Rajas is in the driving seat and we're in the passenger seat. Tamas is that someone else is in the driving seat and we're asleep in the passenger seat. And Sattva is, you're driving.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, folks. Appreciate the questions as always. We are scheduled for Ishavasya Upanishad 6:30 tomorrow evening Pacific time. But with my throat being the way it is, that may be called off. I'll post on the Facebook page if it's going to be the case. So stay tuned there. All right. Have a great day or evening, and I'll catch you next time.